The Earth, hitherto known for its stability, has begun to show signs of a silent restlessness. Phenomena that had previously been rare became commonplace. Earthquakes of increasing magnitude began to shake entire cities, leaving ruins in their wake. The ocean, with its tranquil vastness, rebelled, generating unexpected tsunamis that swept everything in their path. What seemed like a series of coincidences turned into a sequence of bewildering events. In the sky, meteors began to appear more frequently, crossing the atmosphere in brilliant trails that lit up the firmament, even disintegrating with imposing explosions. But the greatest fear was not the immediate impact of these disasters. What caused apprehension was the feeling that, somehow, everything was interconnected. Something bigger was happening. In the midst of this global chaos, one man, Dr. Elias Brenner, dedicated his life to studying the stars. A renowned astrophysicist, he had always believed that the mysteries of the universe could be deciphered, but nothing had prepared him for what he was about to discover. The anomalies that were occurring on Earth were not just a reflection of natural events. They seemed to be orchestrated by a greater force. While scientists worked to understand what was happening, Dr. Brenner, more restless than ever, began to investigate the predictions made by ancient seers. He came across the words of Nostradamus, the Book of Enoch, and the powerful images described in the Apocalypse of John. The description of cosmic cataclysms, with stars falling from the sky and seas turning bitter, was shockingly similar to the signs he observed in his work. The scientist knew that science objectively explained the causes of the natural disasters that were occurring. However, there was something in the air, a feeling that something else was behind it all. When a space station reported an anomalous meteor, with an unknown trajectory and heading towards Earth, the truth could no longer be ignored. The world was preparing for something beyond what anyone could have predicted. The signs were clear, but humanity was still oblivious to the magnitude of what was approaching. As Dr. Brenner delved deeper into the study of prophecies and historical events, the world around him began to change. Cities that had once seemed solid were being swallowed up by despair. But a disconcerting truth hung in the air. Was it possible to avoid the end? What was about to happen was not just a natural cycle of destruction. It was something that men had been ignoring for centuries, something deeply rooted in humanity's beliefs and visions. As the scientist advanced in his research, the question became even more urgent. Could the apocalypse be avoided? Or, as the prophecies suggested, was it inevitable? Somehow, everything seemed to point to a point of no return. The question was on everyone's mind, but no one had the answer. And the only certainty was that, as the planet prepared for the cataclysm, time was rapidly running out. As Dr. Brenner delved deeper into his studies, he found himself surrounded by ancient texts, full of mysterious codes and symbols. They spoke of an era of cosmic storms and natural disasters that would devastate the Earth. Some of these texts, seemingly lost in time, were full of details that fitted perfectly with the events that were happening in the present. Nostradamus, for example, wrote about falling stars and the fury of nature, while the verses in the Book of Revelation spoke of rolling seas and dark skies. The idea that these descriptions could be more than just metaphors began to take root in Brenner's mind. He was not alone in this quest. During one of his investigations in a historical library, he found an ancient manuscript, written in an Aramaic code, which recounted a series of cosmic cataclysms. When he translated it, he discovered that it referred to a series of events that, over the centuries, would repeat themselves like cycles, always announcing the end of an era and the birth of a new one. The words written on that piece of parchment were not simple predictions, but a kind of warning. An attempt to show humanity that, at some point in the future, it would have the opportunity to avoid destruction, but that the choice would depend on the correct interpretation of these signs. But as Dr. Brenner delved deeper into these enigmatic messages, the world around him was collapsing. Increasingly powerful earthquakes were shaking entire continents, while the number of meteors approaching the Earth seemed to grow exponentially. Some of these meteors were so close that they were rumbling across the sky, and scientists were beginning to warn of the imminent risk of a fatal collision. It was then that a distant voice, coming from a group of seers who had appeared out of nowhere, began to spread a message. The end was inevitable, but salvation would only come to those who followed the divine signs. For these seers, The apocalypse was not a scientific catastrophe, but a divine judgment. According to them, natural disasters were a reflection of humanity's moral decadence. They spoke of the need for repentance and a return to lost spiritual traditions. For them, the end would not only be physical, but spiritual. As Brenner wondered how these predictions fit in with what was happening in the world, he realized that something fundamental was being overlooked. Science and religion were converging at some point. What we were experiencing was not a simple set of natural disasters, but a phase that signaled the arrival of a new cycle for the Earth. The scientist, however, didn't know how to convey this message without being seen as a lunatic. He needed a way to warn the world, but how? The enigma of the ancient prophecies was deepening, and Dr. Brenner, tormented by these visions of the past, knew that the answer lay somewhere between what heaven and earth were trying to communicate. However, the sense of despair gripping humanity seemed to be growing. The end of the world, once a distant abstraction, was now knocking at the door. And once again, the question was being asked: could humanity avoid disaster, or was it too late to reverse the course of events? The impact of a meteor, which once seemed distant and theoretical, has become a real threat. Scientists warned of the arrival of a colossal object, an asteroid that would pass dangerously close to Earth, with the possibility of a collision. Structures that had previously seemed firm began to waver. Cities, where life used to go about its daily routine, were swallowed up by unforeseen cataclysms. Gigantic earthquakes, with unknown epicenters, devastated large regions, leaving a trail of destruction wherever they went. People desperately tried to flee to safer places, but there wasn't enough shelter for everyone. Panic spread, and civilization seemed on the verge of collapse. In the midst of this chaos, Dr. Brenner, who had become an important figure in the search for answers, was summoned to help in a global effort to deflect the approaching meteor. A team of scientists was assembled in an emergency project, with the aim of altering the asteroid's trajectory using advanced defense technologies. However, time was running out. Calculations indicated that if the meteor wasn't diverted in a matter of days, a collision would be inevitable. But while scientists worked against the clock, others began to question whether salvation could come from science or faith. Religious leaders, fervent in their beliefs, began to preach that natural disasters were a reflection of divine wrath, and that nothing could prevent the final judgment. They claimed that the only salvation would be spiritual redemption and obedience to divine commands. For many, the catastrophe was the consummation of a long-announced judgment. The most fervent began to abandon reason and turn exclusively to prayer. Meanwhile, the world was preparing for the worst. The meteor was approaching, and scientists were on the verge of a discovery that could change the fate of the Earth. But at the same time, a feeling of helplessness was spreading. Dr. Brenner, increasingly distressed, knew that perhaps the greatest challenge was not deflecting the meteor, but dealing with humanity. The real apocalypse, he was beginning to understand, would not just be physical destruction, but the loss of the ability to act in the face of fate. With the meteor still approaching, the world found itself on the brink of the abyss. Every tremor in the earth, every star that went out in the sky, seemed to be a sign that the destruction was about to be consummated. The scientists' tireless work brought partial results. The meteor was deflected, but its trajectory had already generated shock waves that deeply affected the planet. Tsunamis, earthquakes, and a series of natural disasters continued to devastate continents. Human civilization, now unrecognizable, was beginning to rebuild itself on the ashes of the past. The apocalypse, as many believed, was not a definitive end, but the beginning of a new era. But Dr. Brenner, looking at the devastated world around him, realized something profound. The end was not just about physical destruction. It was the end of a way of life, of a mentality that believed in the immutability of fate. And now, faced with the rebirth of the Earth, a new question arose. What would humanity do with this second chance? The surprising ending was not destruction, but the realization that, even in the face of the greatest cataclysm, humanity has the ability to start again. However, it wouldn't be easy. The Earth, scarred by disasters, would become a field of learning and rebirth. The apocalypse was not an end, but a profound transformation, an opportunity to rewrite human history. And so, in the midst of the destruction, The last question echoed in the air. Would we be able to learn from what we had experienced, or would we repeat the same mistakes in the next cycle? The answer was in our hands, and the Earth, now in its scars, waited patiently to see if humanity would be able to renew itself. Share your opinion in the comments and tell us if you believe that one day the world will end, and if there are any seers who prefer the apocalypse. If you liked this story and want to explore more stories like this, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. The unknown still has a lot to teach us.